Welcome back, everybody. Meet the creepy screen. This is how I capture my videos. Anywho, welcome to the video showing you how to use SAS on the University of Iowa's virtual desktop. So I am starting from the course website for 6242. I have updated the front table here to include a couple of things. First off, this video picks up where the previous video left off. So the first video here, getting into the system, you should have already followed the steps in this video, which includes downloading, installing, and running the virtual private network, then mapping the H drive, which is a server location, onto your local device, and then accessing the virtual desktop. The steps for doing that are right here, in addition to the video showing how. So for today, I'm going to be picking up on this handout after showing you what it looks like to interact with SAS, and in a separate video, I'll show you what it looks like to interact with Stata. I have added a link directly to the University of Iowa Virtual Desktop, which is right here, and the application that I have already connected to is SAS, which is right, where did it go? Right here. So if you go to details, you have the option to add it to your favorites as well as to open it, which I have already done. So here is the window that has SAS. So I've been typing just to make sure that it indeed works. So here we are. I've maximized the window so that you can see all of the screens that you get by default. First thing that we need to do is open up the syntax file that goes with the example1 dataset. So you should have already downloaded this. Here is where mine is stored. Note that I am using the H drive, so this part has been mapped. I am inside a directory known as my SAS files and inside a subfolder that is psqf6242_example1. So if I put my cursor into the address bar here, you'll see that I get a link that I can copy. So this is where we would have left off in the previous video, getting ready to run example 1. So let me open up that file. So we're going to go to File, Open Program. So program is what the syntax file or the text that you type to interact with SAS is called. I'm going to double click on the file called example1_SAS_syntax. It ends in a .sas extension. And here it is. So I'm going to get rid of this other previous editor that I don't need, that I was playing with, and get this one right here. So first off, you'll note that I have increased the size of the font. If you would like to change the size of the font from whatever it is by default, you can do so by making sure you've clicked inside the window that has the text. It's known as the editor. Going up to Tools, go down to Options, Enhanced Editor, which is the first listing. And there's two things in here we're going to check. First, under the General tab, make sure that the box that says Show Line Numbers is checked. So I believe this is not checked by default. It's something that you'll need to turn on. That gets you these numbers that go down the side of the text. That way they're something that we can refer to in common as we go through this file. Tab size, I have mine set to 5, so if you want things aligned like I have it here, you can go ahead and change that from whatever the default is. And appearance, the font size right here, you can have it as small or large as you like. I'm going to do one more up to 18, that way it's nice and big on our screen. Okay, so here we are. I want to orient you to the multiple windows that you're staring at here first. So this window right here that has all the words, this is the editor. This is where you're going to be entering commands and executing commands to make SAS do your bidding. The window that is directly up above, this is called the log. It has blue text in it. This is going to be a record of everything that happens during your session. So all of your commands are going to be echoed to this log window. If things went as directed, if the commands were executed properly, you should see a combination of blue text and black text. If something went awry, you will see red. Red text up in this log indicates an error, so make sure that you're cognizant of that as you're scrolling through. We also have by default a window that's called Output. This is where old school text output used to be directed to. This is turned off by default, so we don't actually need it. I'll go ahead and shut it. So on the right-hand panel, we should just have two windows, the log and example 1 SAS syntax. On the left-hand side, we also have two windows. There's results, which is where when we start to actually execute commands, it has a tree structure that will give you an overview of the results. And then Explorer, which is just like Windows Explorer or I think Finder in Mac. It's an organizational system of your files. So you can navigate to files from inside this window under this PC. The files that are within SAS specifically are known as libraries. So libraries are different locations. It's this yellow file box looking thing. If you double click on libraries, you get to see all of the ones that are open by default when you start the system. So these are just internally recognized places. The only one that you need to pay attention to is this one right here called Work. Work is a temporary location that we will be importing all of our data into. It's something that goes away at the end of the session, so all of the SAS data files will be cleared out when you shut down SAS. This is fine because we don't actually need to save SAS datasets in that format. All we need is the original format of the data and this set of instructions for what we want to have done to it, the program. Okay. So within this program, you'll see a lot of words. That's because I tried to write down as much as possible so that you don't have to be taking notes. But the first thing that you'll notice is the different colors here. Anything in green is a comment. A comment is text that the program is going to ignore. It is a way that you can write notes to yourself about how to do things, what you did, and why. Every line that starts with a comment and ends with a semicolon, or starts with an asterisk, excuse me, and ends in a semicolon is a comment. So I would encourage you to, when you're writing notes to yourself, to write them as comments, asterisk, and then end the line with the semicolon. So within this set of instructions here, I've listed out what the various colors mean. All of the words in here that are colored blue are SAS system commands that it recognizes and knows what to do with. Um, as you scroll down here, you'll see a combination of shades of blue. Dark blue are commands, light blue are options within commands. You'll also see black text. That tends to be things that you need to replace. Names of datasets, names of variables, options, and so forth. And you'll also see text that's in this sort of pinky purple color. The only text that is case or space sensitive is the text that's within this pinky purple color. These are names of places or titles that will show up on your output. So everything else you can type however you'd like. You'll notice my convention in writing these codes is that I tend to write SAS commands in all caps, for instance right here, and any commands that I would need to change, such as names of places, datasets, or variables, in either lowercase or title case. If you see something red, something went wrong. So if, for instance, if you forget to end your line in a semicolon, the next line may be red. So the colors are there to help you. So navigating through this file that I have for you, the first 4 lines are simply options that I've provided to try and declutter your output. By default, the output has extra information like the date and the page numbers that you may that prints by default that aren't necessary. So I have those things on. Several of the SAS procedures automatically make graphs or figures that go with them, and so those can be helpful. So I've turned those on, graphics on here. All of these commands are not available until they've been executed. So what do I mean by executed? Well, there's 2 ways to do that. You can highlight all of the text that you want to execute, and there is either a Windows button to hit or a keyboard shortcut. So up here, you'll see a series of options that looks like sort of standard commands. new file, open, save, print, find, print preview, cut, paste, etc. And if you go over here to something that looks like a little running man, it's very tiny. As I mouse over it, you'll see that it hits submit. This is how you tell SAS to actually use, to execute, and then do whatever text is highlighted. Now, as you mouse up here to the submit key, be very careful because in the worst human factors decision in the history of man, the next key over is the delete key, clear all. So mouse very carefully. Alternatively, you can use a keyboard shortcut, which is the F3 function. So I'm going to mouse very carefully to show you what happens. Up here in the log, you'll note that what I just ran is spit back to me, but otherwise there's no other information. So it appears that everything has executed correctly so far. So I have notes about the colors and how to execute code in here. We'll scroll down. In the programs that I'm going to give you in this class, you'll see boxes like this. This is just a way of visually segmenting these files so that you can look for sections that do various combinations of procedures. So this section right here, this is kind of like a section header, is telling you that this is how you tell SAS where your files are. Historically, with using SAS from the very beginning, this has been the hardest part. Once you get through this hoop, it is smooth sailing, relatively speaking. Why it's challenging is that if you're dealing with SAS files, this is very straightforward. But if you're learning SAS for the first time, you probably don't have any SAS files. And so you're tasked with learning how to import files of other types, such as Excel. To be able to tell SAS where your files are, I am using a convention, what's known as a programming variable right here. So this line in 20, this is very important. What I am doing is creating and defining a program variable that's going to function as an abbreviation. So let means that I am creating a new program variable. Filesave is the name of the program variable that I'm creating. This is my own name. I tend to call things filesave or file path or file location. You can call it whatever you want, and you can have as many of these for separate locations as you wish. But this one, filesave, is currently pointing to where my files are when I'm using SAS on my own desktop. So I use Dropbox for my personal files. It's on the C drive on all of my computers so that the address is always the same. And this is the folder for this class, and this is the subfile. So if you were to take this and run it as is, it would not work because your file structure is not like this. So let me show you what happens if we run something that's an error message. In this case, you won't know that it doesn't work until you go and try to refer to it later. And that's what makes this so tricky. So that's why we have a video trying to help you go through this process. So what we need to do is tell SAS where your files are, and then later when we invoke this abbreviation, we'll find out if it worked. So this is going to be the location that I would use on desktop SAS, which I do not have. So I'm going to comment this out and refer instead to the one down here, which is what it will look like for me inside the virtual machine. So note that this is pointing to the same place with an exception of this preceding part right here. This part is necessary because I'm using the virtual desktop. So how do you know what yours should be? The easiest way to do that, okay, thank you, virtual desktop. Come back, there we go, is to go into Windows Explorer. So within the virtual desktop, you can open Windows Explorer directly in here. I'll give it a second to start. That's going to be the easiest way to understand where the virtual machine thinks your files are. So here it is. So rather than navigating to the files as they are on my personal device, I'm going to navigate to the versions I saved to my H drive, which should look a lot like yours. So here's the H drive, my SAS files. Here's the folder that I had, and here are the files that I want to work with. So I'm going to put my cursor up here, copy, and go back and replace this right here with the H drive. So this case, it's just H. You don't need any extra prefixes. If you stored your files elsewhere, such as when I had used the Dropbox, then you have the extra pieces in front. So I would highly recommend this process of going to using the Windows Explorer, navigate to where you stuck your files, put your cursor up here, and copy the path. If you are unable to do this step successfully, please let me know and I'd be happy to help you troubleshoot. Okay, so we're going to use this version. I'll go ahead and highlight it, run it, and we'll find out in a minute if it worked. How we're going to find out is to import an Excel dataset into a native SAS format. So to import any kind of data that is not already SAS data, you're going to use procimport. The options for it and what they do are described here in comments above, but briefly, all SAS commands start with proc something and they close with run. So proc stands for procedure, import stands for import. The file that we want to import is given right here for data file equals. And note, this has two parts inside the quotes. There's this file save reference, and then a slash and the name of the file with an extension. So what's happening here? File save is the abbreviation that we just created. To invoke that abbreviation, to make it go in and find out what it stands for and replace that text, we refer to the file save location by starting it with an ampersand, the name of the abbreviation, and then a period. So when SAS reads this part, it's going to say, oh, she's talking about this place right here. So this gets SAS to the folder where the information is stored, and then this part picks up and tells it which specific file we'd like to import and what extension. So the name of the dataset we're going to import today is called GSS Example. It's the General Social Survey subset from 2012 that was used in Lecture 1 that shows some of this output. So the reason to do it this way is that as you go through your analyses, you may need to import several different data sets. You may want to save your results to files within this location. Using this abbreviation process saves you from having to type this file path over and over and over again. Because every time that it sees this file save, it's going to replace it with this content. That way, if you were to change where you want something to go, you only have to change it once in this declaration of what file save means, and it will automatically be updated elsewhere in your file. Okay, so we're proc importing this place, this file. What is it going to be called is given right here in this out reference. File names in SAS have two parts. Think of it as a first name and a last name. The first part, the first name here, is the library that the data file is going to. And in this case, it's going to be our friend work that I noted over here on the left-hand side. It's going to be called example1 inside of work. DBMS stands for Database Management System. It tells SAS what kind of file it was originally. That way it knows what to do with it. SAS can import any kind of file that you can throw at it. The most common ones that I've seen would be SPSS, data, Excel, Access. Basically, any kind of file that has a known type, a known extension from a particular type of program, you can probably find an import engine to go with it. So XLSX is what it is in this case. However, I had one student last semester whose combination of operating system and virtual desktop required that instead it was Excel. So if you run this step and it doesn't work, you may need to type Excel instead of XLSX, but I know on mine it's XLSX. And finally, this option replace right here means if you go to import the dataset and it already exists, go ahead and re-import over it. Just make a copy, like just write over it. Now you would think that that sounds problematic, but it's actually not. Because what can happen as you're working with data? So let's say that we import our file, we start doing things to it. We start adding variables, we start maybe removing cases, changing information. At some point, if we screw up or we otherwise decide that we want the original version of the file back, all we'd have to do is just rerun this step and we get a new clean copy of our file. Because the original Excel file is safe and sound in its own format in the location. The version that we are manipulating is a copy that's been imported into this work library. So all of this right here is one command. I indented it that way it wouldn't go too far over, so that we wouldn't overrun the view of the window, I should say. So that's one command here. The next option is something that's specific to Excel. You can tell it which worksheet to pull the information from. This is only necessary if you have a Excel database that has more than one sheet, but it's a good practice to get into. Note that it's pinky purple, so the words that you type here in quotes are case and space specific. They must match exactly. And the last command here, get names equals yes, means that if the first row contains variable names, read those as the names of the variables for the data set, not as data. So that's very handy when importing spreadsheets in which the first row are the names. So if I execute this command, now we'll find out if it understands where this is, because if it understands, it will import my Excel sheet and save it as a new SAS dataset. So let's find out. Highlight the text, navigate carefully to the running man, and it blinked. And you'll note that there is a little bit more text up here in the log. It echoed back what I had submitted in black, and then in blue it says the import dataset has 734 observations and 10 variables. It was successfully created. Hooray! SAS is all about building self-efficacy. It's very happy for you when you successfully create a new dataset. So that means that it understood where this place was well enough to go into it, grab this data set, and bring it into SAS. Now, where did it go? Good question. We know that it is in the work library and that it is called example 1. So if we want to physically look at it, which is helpful from time to time, we're going to mouse over to the work library. I'm going to double click on it, and there's my example 1 dataset. You can open it by double clicking on it as well. And this is what it looks like. So these are data variables that we'll be playing with in several different examples, only some in each example. And one of the quirks of SAS that you must remember is that while it's okay for you to open the data set and scroll through it, particularly if you're checking to see if something that you've done manipulation-wise looks correct, you must close it again before you can do anything to it. So this is very different, especially for SPSS or Stata users who are used to having your data set sitting open. You must have it closed or SAS will yell at you. So note that all of these variables in here are numeric. I have an ID variable, I have a gender variable, which looks to be binary, age, which looks to be integers only. This is years of education, this is income, and so forth. So we're only going to be working with a subset of variables in this example, and the next step is going to give you more information about what those are. So I'm going to close this, very carefully navigate to the right X, and get rid of that so that we can continue on. Okay, next step. In all of your examples and in all of your homeworks, I am going to give you information about the variables in your data set. That way you know exactly what you're looking at. So here this information is going to come in 2 steps. proc format, and then a second step that is going to be adding labeling information. So first, what proc format does is create a labeling system that SAS holds in memory. So it's an assignment of values to labels. In this instance, I am only creating one labeling format. It's going to be used for marital status, so I am naming the labeling format F marital. I always put an F in front for when I'm naming formats as my own convention. And then I assign labels to the values. So 1 in that variable is going to mean 1.married, 2 means 2.widowed, and so forth. Just as a reminder, I put the numbers along with the labels. That way they stay in the original order of the variable. Otherwise, it goes into alphabetic order within SAS. So fMarital is a labeling system that is defined within proc format. So just like we had proc import that ended in a run, we have a proc format that ends in a run. And note that there's a semicolon after the run as well. So think of run as like the please that you have to say at the end of your request to make it go. So I'm going to go ahead and run those lines 37 through 41. There we go. And it says format fMarital has been output. So now over here in my work library, there's another little yellow box. You don't need to worry about it, but that is where the formats are being stored. Okay, next is labels for my variables. So I am going to define labels for the variables as well as apply that marital format to the marital variable. In SAS, anytime that you want to do something to a dataset, you have to specify which dataset it is. Even if there's only one open, it's good to get into the habit of doing this. So on line 46 through 54, this is all one command. What it's going to do is identify the dataset that I want to do something to, apply the labels, apply the format, and then close. Line 46 here deserves special attention. This is telling it which data set we're going to be modifying. In this case, it's in the work library. It's called example 1, and it is saving it as itself. So when you're working with data sets, anytime that you make changes to a data set, you have the option to save it under a different name. If you don't want to do that, then you will put the same name under this data command as in the set command. The way that SAS is reading this is as follows. Data means make me a new data set. So if all I had was just this part, I would end up with a new blank data set in the work library called example 1. But instead, because it has the second part here, it says make me a new data set in the work library called example 1 from. Set means from the dataset in the work library called example 1. So I'm pulling in this dataset, adding stuff to it, and then saving it as the same name. What's being added to it is right here. So first, we're adding variable labels. So label is the command. The variable column name that the label is to refer to is given after label, followed by an equal sign, and then the label itself is given in quotes. So my convention in writing variable labels is to always echo the name of the variable first. That way they're paired together when you look at the data set. So what I'm doing here is saying, okay, the column that is called marital. So marital is the name of the variable. That's what I would refer to get any information about this variable. This is the part that can't have spaces, can't have special characters other than underscore, and must start with a letter. So marital is the variable's name. It's the name of the column. I am then telling it, oh, by the way, what that means is this. My label for it is 5 category marital status. So you can write whatever you'd like in these labels. You have up to 256 characters, I think. They can have spaces, special characters, just go nuts. Write as much information as it takes to differentiate this variable from others like it in the file and to enhance reproducibility with respect to how it was made, when it was made, why it was made, and so forth. So this labeling command is going to apply 3 sets of labels to 3 different variables. The variables are marital, education, and income. And at the end of the command is 1 semicolon right here. So this is all one command that's doing 3 things at once. Last but not least, this part right here. What this is doing is referring to the values of marital, and it's going to ask it to take this labeling system that was defined ahead of time. F marital is the name of the labeling system, and apply that labeling system to the marital column. So this is different than what label is doing up here. The entire variable marital gets this descriptive label to go with it. This format statement down here is creating the ties as to 1 means this, 2 means this, 3 means this more specifically. So after I execute this code, you don't have to change anything. All you have to do is run it, lines 46 to 54. Go ahead and hit the running man there. You'll see the text that I just entered echoed back in the log, as well as another happy message. If I go into the example1 dataset and click on it, it looks a little different. Now the variables that I referred to in my code, marital, education, and income, are going to have labels. I don't see them right now in this view because I'm still looking at the names. If you go to the view window up here, there is an option for labels versus names. If you switch to labels, you can see that some of them now have labels, the ones that I applied labels to. You'll note that the names go away when you're viewing the labels, and that's why I always stick the names inside the labels to combat that problem. In addition to the labels that show up at the top here, you'll note that marital, which used to be numbers running from 1 to 5, now has what looks like words. So even though it looks like this variable is now a text variable, a string variable, it's not. It's still just 1 to 5. But what SAS has done is apply the labeling convention that we requested to show what it looks like inside the dataset, and then to use these labels whenever we request information or analysis involving this variable. So this process of creating variable labels and applying variable formats, this is not something that is strictly necessary. It's something that will save you grief from having to memorize what all of these things mean. You will end up working with a lot of different data sets. It's very easy to forget what variables are, especially when there's lots of permutations of them. So this is you doing yourself 6 months from now a favor, making sure that you have enough documentation to go with your data so that you will never be confused in the future. Okay, so do you see the little star here next to the name of the file? That indicates that I have not saved my work. It is very important to do so, especially inside the virtual desktop, because if you lose internet connection, your work can be lost. So to save your syntax, you don't have to do anything different than what you would normally do. Control S as a keyboard shortcut or mouse up to the little save icon, and that will save your syntax. If for whatever reason you get in a situation where you can't save it, and this has happened to me before, somehow there's a disconnect and I can see that I have my work here, but I can't save it, copy it and paste it into a text window outside of this system. That way you can always paste it back in once you get going again. So please remember to save your work as you go about your typing. So there's a note here on line 56 that now the dataset is ready to use. So when you are doing homework, or if you want to run the example files that I give you on your own, just to recap, the only thing that you need to change is where your files are to navigate SAS to the folder location that you downloaded the files to. Once it understands what filesave means, where this place is, you should be able to run everything else and have it apply the labeling information to your dataset, and it should be ready to use. If there are other transformations that you need to do in order to conduct your homework, I will show you what those look like as part of the example. All right, I think that is a good place to stop for now. The next video will pick up going through what it looks like to actually generate output. Thanks for watching, and as the kids say, make sure you like and subscribe and get the merch.